A father pushing his daughter in a stroller gets accosted by men claiming to be HOA officials, demanding he move or face punishment. But when these imposters escalate their intimidation, the rage of a police chief, James Miller, ignites. With a single call, he flips the script, exposing their scam and bringing them to justice. But just wait to see how this explosive encounter ends, and how justice finally prevails. It was a rare, precious afternoon of peace for James Miller, the police chief of Chicago. The world outside his office had been a blur of arrests, investigations, and calls for action. But today was different. Today, he had decided to step away from the grind for a few moments of normalcy. His daughter Kimberly giggled softly as she cooed from her stroller, her tiny hands reaching out to grab at the air. The sun was low, casting a soft golden light over the quiet sidewalk as they strolled along the park near their home. James smiled to himself, content in the simplicity of the moment. But that tranquility was short-lived. A voice broke through the serenity, harsh and demanding. "Hey, move that stroller!" James's head snapped toward the source of the command. Two men stood there, both wearing identical HOA uniforms, the letters almost too large for their frames. Their eyes were cold, dismissive, as if the world existed solely to cater to their whims. One of them pinched his nose dramatically, the kind of exaggerated gesture that made it clear he thought this whole situation was beneath him. James blinked, momentarily confused, his brow furrowing. "What?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're getting complaints," the man continued, his tone dripping with an almost mocking authority. "This sidewalk's not for strollers." James paused, his heart rate quickening. What was happening? The sidewalk was wide enough for a dozen people, and he had seen dozens of parents push strollers through here without issue. The audacity of these men, strangers in uniforms no less, left him speechless for a moment. Before he could gather his thoughts, the second man took a step forward, eyes fixed on Kimberly's stroller. Without warning, he kicked it, the action sharp and purposeful. The stroller rocked violently, and Kimberly's peaceful cooing was replaced by a startled cry. The baby's delicate head jerked slightly, and the stroller teetered dangerously, almost toppling over. James's stomach dropped. His breath caught in his throat as he rushed forward, hands instinctively reaching to steady the stroller. But the men only smirked, clearly unfazed by the distress they'd caused. The harsh reality of the situation settled in. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was an attack on his family's safety, and they had no intention of backing down. For a moment, James stood there, shocked, his mind racing. How had something as simple as a walk with his daughter turned into this? And who were these men to tell him to touch his daughter's stroller in such a callous manner? The silence between them stretched, heavy with tension. James locked eyes with the man who had kicked the stroller, his jaw tightening. The air between them was charged, and it felt as though time had slowed, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on his chest. This wasn't just a rude encounter. This was something far worse. Fury surged through James like a tidal wave, cold and relentless. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles turning white. How could these men, these supposed officials, dare treat him like this? The anger was sharp, a searing heat rising from deep within him. How dare they lay a finger on his daughter's stroller? How dare they, with their petty authority, disrupt the calm of his day? The initial shock had faded, leaving only a raw, primal rage in its place. He wasn't just a father now. He was the protector of his child. And this was an offense that demanded to be addressed. "Do you have any idea who I am?" James's voice was low, barely above a growl, but it carried the weight of authority that was his to wield. He could feel the words leave his mouth like a weapon. They weren't just a question. They were a challenge, a warning. The man who had kicked the stroller barely flinched. Instead, he laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that scraped against James's nerves. "And your badge won't stop us." The words landed like a slap to the face, sending a jolt of disbelief through James's chest. It was a gut punch, a realization that these men didn't care about him, didn't care about the law, didn't care about anything but their own misplaced power. They had no respect for him, or anyone, it seemed. For a moment the world felt small, just James and these two men, their lives and careers, a world apart, but their fates suddenly intertwined. He could feel his pulse quicken, a deep, simmering anger boiling in his veins. James took a step closer, his gaze hardening. Every fiber of his being was telling him to take control, to end this nonsense, to show them the price of disrespect. The situation was spiraling, but what stung more than anything was the arrogance in their eyes. They weren't scared. They weren't intimidated. To them, James was just another man on the street, powerless in the face of their petty enforcement. His jaw tightened, and in the thick silence, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming urge to do something, to make them understand. But he held back, for now. But in that moment, he knew. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He wasn't just angry anymore, he was consumed by it. His thoughts were sharp, his focus laser-like. They didn't realize who they were dealing with. He wasn't just some man they could intimidate. He was the police chief of Chicago, and he didn't take threats against his family lightly. But no matter how much he burned with rage, he knew that this wasn't just about defending his honor. This was about something bigger. They had shown their hand, and James would not back down. The gloves were off. James didn't hesitate. His hand was steady as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his mind moving with frightening clarity. He wasn't just going to stand here and let this slide. No, these men had made a critical mistake, and now they were going to pay the price. His thumb hovered over the screen as he dialed the number he knew by heart, the one he could rely on when things got out of hand, the one that could make things move, make things happen. The line rang once, twice. Then came the voice, calm and familiar, but still sharp with attention. "What's up?" James's jaw clenched as he stared down the two men in front of him, his grip tightening on the phone as his temper surged to dangerous heights. "I want them arrested. Now. These guys are frauds." There was a beat of silence on the other end, a single, knowing breath. The person on the other side understood immediately. No questions, no hesitation, just action. "You got it," came the response, crisp and assured. James didn't need to explain further. He trusted that the wheels were already in motion. Every word had been deliberate, every action calculated. This wasn't just about standing up to a couple of bullies on a sidewalk. This was about exposing a lie, about making sure these charlatans paid for the chaos they were trying to cause. He could feel the fury bubbling up inside him again, but this time it was controlled, focused. The truth was about to come to light, and when it did, everything would change. Minutes passed like hours. James didn't let his eyes leave the two imposters. They had no idea what was coming, but he did. He could see it unfolding in his mind, a scene where their smug grins were wiped off their faces, their facade of authority crumbling in the face of real power. They were in over their heads, and now they were going to feel the weight of their actions. Then the phone buzzed. James looked down, his heart pounding. The truth had been uncovered, and it was worse than he had thought. The so-called HOA officers were nothing more than imposters, crooks preying on the community for money, pretending to hold some sort of official power they didn't possess. There was no HOA, no legal backing. They had been exploiting people, using fear to line their pockets. The boiling rage that had consumed James now turned to a cold, calculated fury. His eyes narrowed and his breath deepened. This wasn't just about the stroller anymore. This wasn't about his walk with Kimberly. No, this was about justice. These men had taken a step too far, assuming they could intimidate and extort without consequences. Now, it was time for the consequences to catch up with them. James could feel the satisfaction rising within him. The anger had sharpened into something more, something lethal. They had crossed a line, and now they would pay. The scene unfolded in front of James like a well-executed plan. The two men, their once confident expressions now dripping with fear, were shackled and led away by uniformed officers. The fake badges they had so proudly worn were now useless, discarded in the back of the squad car. Their crime was exposed, their lies unraveling with every step. As the officers moved them through the building, James couldn't suppress a small, satisfied smile. The men were finally where they belonged, under arrest. Their days of exploiting the community were over, and it was his determination, his refusal to back down, that had brought it all to light. Back in his office, the tension of the day began to melt away. James leaned back in his chair and let out a deep breath. The adrenaline that had surged through him earlier had ebbed, leaving behind a strange but welcome stillness. His thoughts drifted back to the chaos on the sidewalk, to the moment when those men had crossed the line. It felt like a lifetime ago. Now, the only thing that mattered was the overwhelming sense of justice served. It wasn't just the victory over the two impostors that felt so good. It was the knowledge that he had done what was right. He had protected his family, his community, and his own integrity. He had acted swiftly, decisively, and now the weight of that decision felt satisfying in a way nothing else could. James closed his eyes for a moment, the events of the day replaying in his mind, the initial shock, the fury, the rage, and then the resolution. Everything had fallen into place exactly as he had hoped. The two men were exposed for what they truly were, fraudulent, self-serving criminals, and he had been the one to put an end to it. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened his eyes, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "All wrapped up, Chief," came the voice from the doorway. One of the officers, standing tall and proud, holding the case file in hand. James nodded, standing up to meet him. "Good job," he said, his voice calm but filled with the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had done the right thing. The officer handed over the file, a gesture of respect, as James's fingers brushed over the paper. The case was closed. The swindlers were off the streets, and for the first time in a long while, he could feel the weight of the world lift, even if just for a moment. As the officer left, James took a seat behind his desk, letting the silence settle around him. He didn't need to celebrate. The satisfaction of knowing the job was done, the feeling that he had done more than just his duty, was enough. He could finally relax. Justice had been served, and for now, that was all that mattered.